The greatest lies are never told to deceive others. They are told to survive. The first rays of autumn sunlight stretched across the ancient rooftops of Silver Hollow as the village awoke to the sound of distant church bells and bustling merchants preparing for another market day. But beneath the ordinary rhythm of life lingered a quiet tension that everyone could feel without speaking aloud. Only 3 days remained before the grand claiming ceremony, the tradition every unmated Omega feared and every ambitious Alpha anticipated, a ceremony that had shaped the kingdom for generations. Throughout every street, families whispered hopeful prayers or anxious worries. Shopkeepers decorated windows with royal banners, and travelers hurried toward the capital, eager to witness the event that would determine countless futures. Yet among all the excitement, one young woman moved through the village with careful, measured steps, her weathered walking cane gently tapping the cobblestones in a slow and familiar rhythm. Olivia Carter kept her eyes lowered beneath soft golden hair, her simple cream-colored dress fluttering in the cool morning breeze as neighbors greeted her with sympathetic smiles. Some offered to guide her across the street, even though she never asked. Others quietly pitied the beautiful Omega whose sight had supposedly disappeared nearly 10 years before. Children politely stepped aside to clear her path, while elderly women left small baskets of fresh bread outside her modest cottage whenever they believed she might need help. No one questioned the story anymore. For almost a decade, Silver Hollow had accepted that Olivia lived in darkness, and over time, even those who had once doubted her eventually stopped looking for answers. They saw only what she allowed them to see. What none of them realized was that every careful step, every gentle turn of her head, every perfectly measured pause before crossing a busy street had been rehearsed thousands of times until pretending became second nature. Long before sunrise each morning, when no one could possibly be watching, Olivia quietly stood beside the small window overlooking the forest beyond the village, allowing herself a few precious moments to admire colors she could never acknowledge in public. She watched crimson leaves drift through crisp autumn air, watched birds rise above towering pine trees, and watched golden sunlight slowly paint the distant mountains before closing her eyes again whenever footsteps approached her home. She had become an actress without an audience, performing a role every waking hour because the truth felt far more dangerous than the lie. 10 years earlier, when she was only 14, she had overheard influential Alpha families discussing young Omega girls as though they were valuable prizes waiting to be claimed rather than human beings with hopes of their own. That single conversation had quietly rewritten the course of her entire life. Since that day, Olivia had hidden behind imagined blindness, believing that a forgotten Omega would always be safer than a desired one. The deception had cost her friendships, opportunities, laughter, and nearly every ordinary joy someone her age should have known. But it had also protected something she treasured more than comfort, the freedom to choose her own future. As she continued toward the village square that morning, unaware that destiny had already begun moving beyond the castle walls, the banners overhead swayed gently in the breeze, while whispers spread from traveler to traveler, carrying astonishing news across the kingdom. After years away governing distant territories and restoring peace throughout the realm, the Alpha King had finally returned home, and before another sunset arrived, 2 lives built upon entirely different secrets would begin moving toward the same unforgettable moment. The memory Olivia carried most faithfully was not of fear itself, but of the moment she realized that silence could become a shield. 10 years earlier, she had been only 14 when her father accepted temporary work repairing fences outside one of the great estates belonging to a respected Alpha family. Curious and full of youthful innocence, Olivia wandered no farther than the flowering courtyard, where voices drifted through an open window with startling clarity. Hidden behind blooming rose bushes, she listened as influential guests spoke comfortably about the approaching claiming season. They did not speak with cruelty, nor did they believe anyone could hear them, yet their words settled heavily upon her young heart. They compared promising Omega daughters to treasured investments, discussed which families possessed the greatest beauty or strongest lineage, and debated future pairings with the detached confidence of merchants evaluating valuable property. Not once did anyone ask what those young women might dream for themselves. Olivia quietly stepped away before anyone noticed her, but something inside her had changed forever. During the long walk home beneath fading afternoon sunlight, she understood that if enough people believed she could never become the ideal Omega they sought, perhaps they would simply look elsewhere. The thought frightened her almost as much as it comforted her, yet over the following weeks the idea refused to disappear. With remarkable patience, she began practicing small details that no one else would ever consider. She memorized every pathway leading through Silver Hollow, counted every step between familiar buildings, learned to recognize neighbors by the rhythm of their footsteps and the sound of their voices, and trained herself never to react naturally whenever something unexpected entered her field of vision. At first she stumbled often, not because she could not see, but because pretending demanded greater concentration than ordinary life. Her parents worried endlessly until Olivia finally shared the truth with them through quiet tears and trembling honesty. Although shocked by her decision, they also understood the fear growing throughout the kingdom as more ambitious alpha families competed for influential matches each passing year. Reluctantly, they agreed to protect her secret, praying the deception would only last a short while. Days slowly became months. Months quietly became years, and the role Olivia invented gradually became inseparable from her public identity. Children who had once played beside her grew into adults who genuinely believed she had never seen another sunrise. Travelers offered assistance. Without hesitation, merchants carefully described every item she purchased, and strangers praised her courage while unknowingly admiring a performance built upon relentless discipline. Sometimes guilt whispered that she should reveal everything, especially when kind people sacrificed their own time to help her across crowded streets. But every spring another claiming season arrived, carrying stories of Omegas leaving home with unfamiliar alpha households in distant provinces. Some found happiness, many simply adapted, yet every story reminded Olivia why she continued living behind carefully lowered eyes. Even alone inside her small cottage, she never allowed herself to abandon the habit completely because she feared one careless mistake might undo an entire decade of sacrifice. On that cool autumn afternoon, as she carefully arranged freshly baked bread upon her modest kitchen table, while sunlight danced across the wooden floor, she pretended never to notice. She remained completely unaware that somewhere beyond the towering castle gates, a ruler known for seeing truth where others accepted appearances had quietly begun observing the kingdom with patient, searching eyes. The kingdom welcomed its returning ruler with ringing cathedral bells, fluttering banners, and endless celebration. Yet the Alpha King found far greater interest in ordinary streets than royal ceremonies. Adrian Hawthorne had spent years traveling across distant provinces, settling disputes, restoring neglected villages, and learning that the true strength of a kingdom could never be measured inside magnificent castles alone. Long before the official claiming ceremony, he quietly exchanged his embroidered royal robes for the plain clothing of a traveling merchant, choosing a weathered brown cloak, sturdy leather boots, and a simple walking staff that concealed neither authority nor pride, only his identity. Accompanied by no royal escort and recognized by no one, he wandered through Silver Hollow with patient curiosity, greeting shopkeepers, purchasing warm bread from cheerful bakers, and listening far more than he spoke. Every conversation revealed another small piece of the kingdom he hoped to protect. Some praised the coming festival with excitement, while others whispered anxious concerns about daughters approaching claiming age. Adrian noticed those quieter voices most of all. They carried worries that official reports never captured. As the afternoon sun drifted lower across the village rooftops, his attention settled upon a familiar figure walking carefully along the cobblestone road with a polished wooden cane. Villagers stepped aside with practiced kindness, greeting Olivia Carter with gentle smiles that reflected years of shared sympathy. Adrian observed quietly from the opposite side of the street. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Her pace remained measured, her expression peaceful, her lowered gaze entirely convincing. Yet years spent studying people had taught him that truth often lived inside the smallest details. As a gust of autumn wind carried a bright maple leaf across the road, Olivia instinctively tilted her head a fraction of an inch before the leaf brushed against her shoulder, almost as though she had followed its movement without realizing it. The gesture lasted less than a heartbeat, disappearing so naturally that no one else appeared to notice. Adrian continued walking without reacting. Moments later, a playful little boy chased a rolling wooden toy directly into Olivia's path. Before anyone nearby could call a warning, she shifted one careful step to her left with perfect timing, allowing the child to retrieve his toy without collision. The movement appeared graceful rather than miraculous, subtle enough to escape ordinary attention, yet Adrian quietly stored the moment within his memory. He did not conclude anything. One observation could be coincidence. Two might still be chance. Wisdom demanded patience before judgment. He followed at a respectful distance as Olivia entered the village marketplace. Merchants enthusiastically described colorful fabrics and polished pottery she supposedly could not see, while she responded with warm gratitude, asking thoughtful questions that matched someone relying entirely upon spoken descriptions. Everything seemed flawless until a flock of birds suddenly lifted into the sky from a nearby fountain. Almost unconsciously, Olivia's face turned upward toward the sound, and for the briefest instant her eyes reflected the bright afternoon sunlight before she gently lowered them once more. It was not enough to expose her secret, but it was enough to awaken Adrian's curiosity. He found himself wondering not whether she had hidden the truth, but why someone would willingly carry such a burden for so many years. There was no bitterness in her smile, no manipulation in her manner, only quiet caution wrapped inside remarkable discipline. As evening shadows stretched across Silver Hollow and villagers returned home to prepare for another day closer to the claiming ceremony, Adrian walked back toward the distant castle with more questions than answers, unaware that his growing curiosity had already become the first thread connecting two lives shaped by entirely different forms of responsibility. Morning arrived wrapped in pale silver clouds, leaving the entire kingdom with the quiet anticipation that always came before the grand claiming ceremony. Only 2 days remained. Every conversation in Silver Hollow eventually returned to the celebration waiting beyond the castle gates. Yet Olivia continued living exactly as she had for the past decade, believing consistency was the safest companion a secret could have. She left her cottage carrying a small woven basket filled with fresh herbs and warm bread for an elderly widow who lived near the edge of the village. Her familiar walking cane traced gentle rhythms across the cobblestones while neighbors greeted her with genuine kindness, never questioning the careful performance they had witnessed for so many years. Across the square, Adrian watched from beneath the hood of his weathered traveling cloak. He had returned before sunrise, not because he wished to expose her deception, but because curiosity had become impossible to ignore. Every instinct developed through years of leadership reminded him that fear often disguised itself in unexpected ways, and nothing about Olivia resembled someone attempting to manipulate others for personal gain. Instead, she carried herself with remarkable humility, accepting assistance only when refusing it would seem unnatural, thanking everyone with quiet sincerity, and never asking for special treatment. Adrian decided that if the truth existed, it would reveal itself naturally through ordinary moments rather than direct questions. As Olivia reached the village well, a young girl accidentally dropped a small bundle of wildflowers beside the stone path. Before the child noticed, Olivia bent gracefully and lifted the flowers with effortless precision, then paused almost imperceptibly before extending them toward the little girl's voice instead of her exact position. To everyone nearby, the gesture appeared perfectly consistent with someone relying upon sound alone. Adrian, however, had noticed that her hand found the flowers immediately without searching. Later that morning, a merchant enthusiastically rearranged colorful ribbons upon a wooden display as a playful breeze scattered several across the ground. Olivia stepped carefully around each ribbon without touching a single one, her measured pace never faltering. Again, she disguised every movement behind believable caution, yet Adrian quietly recognized the extraordinary discipline required to maintain such perfection. She was not surviving through luck. She was surviving through relentless practice. Hours passed without a single conversation between them, although their paths crossed repeatedly throughout the bustling marketplace. Once, Olivia briefly turned toward a distant church bell before its first note fully echoed across the square, reacting instead to the subtle movement of pigeons rising into the air moments earlier. It was another tiny detail that no ordinary observer would have considered meaningful. Adrian simply smiled to himself. He still refused to draw conclusions. Instead, he found himself asking a different question altogether. What kind of fear could persuade someone to surrender 10 years of ordinary life? As evening approached, dark clouds gathered over the surrounding hills, bringing a light autumn rain that encouraged villagers to hurry home beneath umbrellas and heavy cloaks. Olivia paused beneath the awning of a quiet bakery, listening patiently while others rushed past. Adrian stepped beneath the same shelter a respectful distance away, neither introducing himself nor disturbing her silence. For several peaceful moments, they simply watched and listened to the gentle rainfall together, strangers in appearance, yet connected by unspoken questions neither was ready to voice. Olivia sensed an unfamiliar calm in the traveler's presence without understanding why, while Adrian realized that whatever truth she carried had never been born from selfishness. Somewhere beneath years of carefully rehearsed blindness lived a woman protecting something she believed was worth sacrificing almost everything else. And for the first time since returning to the kingdom, the Alpha King understood that the coming ceremony might reveal far more than anyone expected. The morning of the grand claiming ceremony arrived beneath a cloudless sky, and for the first time in many years, Olivia wished the sun had hidden behind rain instead. The capital overflowed with visitors from every corner of the kingdom as elegant carriages rolled through towering castle gates. Musicians filled broad stone courtyards with graceful melodies, and colorful banners drifted gently above thousands of gathered citizens. Every unmated Omega stood quietly among family members, while respected Alpha households prepared to witness the ancient tradition that had shaped generations. Olivia remained near the back of the assembled crowd, her familiar walking cane resting lightly in her hand as she lowered her eyes with practiced precision. Around her, sympathetic whispers followed wherever she stood. Some believed it was unfortunate that someone as kind as Olivia would never experience the same opportunities as other young women. Others quietly remarked that blindness had spared her from unwanted attention. Olivia accepted every misunderstanding without protest because correcting them would require revealing the truth she had protected for 10 long years. Inside the magnificent castle, Adrian had already resumed his place as Alpha King, wearing black royal robes embroidered with silver thread that reflected the morning light pouring through enormous stained glass windows. Courtiers welcomed him with formal bows, advisors presented the final order of ceremony, and distinguished Alpha families waited patiently for the royal procession to begin. Yet Adrian found himself thinking less about tradition than about the quiet Omega who had spent a decade carrying an invisible burden without asking anyone to carry it beside her. He had returned to the castle the previous evening with certainty growing stronger inside his heart. Olivia could see. The question that remained was not whether she had hidden the truth, but whether exposing it would protect her or destroy everything she had sacrificed to preserve. As the royal procession entered the vast ceremonial hall, every conversation faded into respectful silence. Sunlight painted golden patterns across polished marble floors while hundreds of candles shimmered beneath towering crystal chandeliers. Olivia listened carefully as attendants directed participants toward their assigned places. Every measured step she took reflected years of discipline, every movement perfectly balanced between caution and confidence. Adrian watched from the elevated platform without allowing even the slightest change in expression. Then, as the formal greetings concluded, an unexpected moment unfolded. A young palace attendant carrying ceremonial ribbons stumbled slightly while turning a corner. One ribbon drifted silently toward the floor several feet from Olivia. Before anyone nearby reacted, Olivia instinctively shifted her foot just enough to keep the delicate fabric from being stepped on. Her movement lasted no more than a heartbeat before she gently returned to complete stillness, but Adrian noticed exactly what he had quietly expected. He did not feel triumph. He felt compassion. Looking across the great hall, he no longer saw a woman protecting a lie. He saw someone who had surrendered ordinary happiness because fear had convinced her that honesty would cost even more. Around them, nobles admired the magnificent decorations. Musicians prepared for the ceremonial announcement, and guests anticipated another familiar celebration. None of them realized the greatest revelation waiting inside the hall had nothing to do with royal customs. Adrian slowly rose from the throne as silence naturally settled across the gathering. His calm blue eyes rested upon Olivia with neither accusation nor anger, only quiet understanding. And in that single peaceful moment she sensed, without lifting her gaze, that someone had finally looked beyond the role she had spent 10 years performing and had begun to see the frightened young woman who had been hiding behind it all along. The silence inside the great ceremonial hall became so complete that even the soft crackle of candlelight seemed unusually loud as Adrian slowly descended the polished marble steps leading from the royal throne. Every noble, servant, elder, and visitor watched without understanding why the Alpha King had interrupted the ancient order of the ceremony before a single name had been called. Olivia remained exactly where she stood, her fingers resting lightly upon the smooth handle of her walking cane, while her heartbeat echoed louder than the musicians who had quietly lowered their instruments. She had imagined countless endings to the secret she had carried for 10 years, yet none of them resembled the stillness surrounding her now. Adrian stopped several feet away, leaving enough space to honor her dignity rather than invade it. His calm blue eyes reflected neither disappointment nor suspicion. Instead, they carried the quiet compassion of someone who had spent many years searching beneath appearances. When he finally spoke, his voice remained steady, gentle, and clear enough to reach every corner of the vast hall. He said that there were moments when a kingdom learned more from one person's silence than from 1,000 public speeches. Confused whispers drifted through the gathering as curious faces turned toward Olivia. Adrian continued without raising his voice. He explained that over the past several days he had walked through Silver Hollow disguised as an ordinary traveler, observing not only the people around him, but also a young woman whose courage had hidden itself inside remarkable discipline. Olivia felt her breath catch as she realized the quiet traveler she had unknowingly stood beside. During the reign had been the Alpha King himself. Before fear could fully settle within her, Adrian spoke again, carefully choosing every word. He did not accuse her of deception. He did not call her dishonest. Instead, he simply said that she had seen every sunrise for many years while allowing the world to believe otherwise. A wave of astonishment spread through the hall. Some nobles exchanged bewildered glances while others stared silently at Olivia, waiting for denial that never came. Her hands trembled almost imperceptibly as tears gathered behind eyes she had spent a decade pretending could not see. Slowly, for the first time in 10 long years, she lifted her gaze without hesitation. Her eyes met Adrian's across the quiet hall, and an audible gasp moved through the crowd as every witness realized the impossible truth standing before them. Olivia closed her eyes briefly before speaking with a voice softened by relief rather than fear. She admitted that everything the king had said was true. She explained that she had never wished to deceive kind neighbors or generous strangers, but that she had once been a frightened 14-year-old girl who believed disappearing behind imagined blindness was the only way to protect the freedom to choose her own future. She spoke without bitterness, never blaming any individual person, only describing the quiet fear that had followed her through every passing year. When she finished, no one laughed. No one condemned her. The hall remained wrapped in thoughtful silence because her confession carried the unmistakable weight of honesty finally released after years of quiet endurance. Adrian looked across the gathered families before returning his attention to Olivia. His expression remained warm and unwavering as though the truth she had revealed had only confirmed what he had already understood. In that extraordinary moment, the ancient ceremony quietly stopped feeling like a tradition waiting to continue and began feeling like the beginning of a conversation the kingdom should have started many generations before. For several long moments, no one spoke because every heart inside the great hall seemed to be searching for words that had suddenly become too small for the truth standing before them. Olivia remained motionless with quiet tears resting upon her cheeks, no longer lowering her eyes or hiding behind carefully practiced gestures. The walking cane that had accompanied her through 10 years of fear suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before, not because she still needed it, but because it carried the weight of every sacrifice she had made to protect a future she believed belonged to her alone. Adrian looked across the gathered families before turning toward the royal council assembled beside the throne. His expression remained calm, but there was unmistakable conviction behind every word he spoke next. He said that a kingdom worthy of loyalty could never be built upon fear, and no tradition deserved to survive if it required someone to surrender honesty simply to preserve the freedom to choose their own life. A quiet murmur moved through the nobles as several exchanged uncertain glances, while many ordinary citizens listened with growing hope. Adrian continued by explaining that leadership was not measured by preserving every ancient custom without question. True leadership required the courage to recognize when compassion demanded something better. He acknowledged that the claiming ceremony had once been created with honorable intentions, seeking to unite families and strengthen the kingdom. But he also admitted that any tradition could gradually lose its original purpose when people forgot the dignity of those standing at its center. He looked directly toward the young Omegas gathered throughout the hall, then toward the Alpha families who had spent generations preparing for this very day. His voice never rose in anger, yet every sentence carried quiet authority. From that day forward, he declared, no Omega within his kingdom would ever again be expected to accept a future without willing consent. Partnership would no longer begin with obligation or expectation, but with mutual choice, respect, and trust freely offered by both hearts. The announcement echoed through the enormous chamber more powerfully than any ceremonial trumpet could have done. Some elders closed their eyes thoughtfully as though remembering forgotten wisdom, while younger citizens smiled through tears they had never expected to shed. Olivia listened in complete disbelief. For 10 years, she had convinced herself that survival required hiding from the world. She had never imagined that one person's willingness to understand her fear could reshape the lives of countless others. Adrian slowly stepped closer, still leaving enough distance to honor her comfort. He thanked her, not for pretending to be blind, but for revealing a truth that many people had quietly carried without ever finding the courage to speak aloud. Olivia could scarcely answer. Her voice trembled as she admitted that she had always believed the strongest people were those born with power, influence, or noble names. Adrian gently shook his head. He told her that courage often appeared much more quietly than strength, living inside ordinary people who chose hope even while carrying fear. Around them, the atmosphere inside the hall slowly transformed. The ceremony everyone had expected no longer resembled the beginning of arranged futures. Instead, it became the beginning of something entirely new. Olivia looked down at the familiar walking cane resting in her hands. For the first time in 10 years, she realized she no longer needed it to protect herself. She was not yet ready to let it go, but its purpose had already begun to fade. Just as the fear that had once shaped every step of her life quietly gave way to something she had almost forgotten was possible: freedom. In the days that followed, the kingdom felt different in ways that no proclamation alone could explain. The announcement made inside the great ceremonial hall spread from village to village faster than the autumn wind, carried by merchants traveling dusty roads, families gathering around evening fireplaces, and neighbors sharing quiet conversations across wooden fences. Some people struggled to accept that a tradition followed for generations had changed in a single morning, while many others welcomed the decision with grateful hearts, believing they had witnessed history choosing compassion over fear. Olivia returned to her small cottage in Silver Hollow without the attention she had once dreaded. Although curious glances still followed her through the marketplace, they were no longer filled with pity or misunderstanding. Instead, people greeted her with genuine respect, recognizing not the woman who had pretended to be blind, but the woman who had finally trusted the truth enough to reveal it. The familiar walking cane remained beside her front door, untouched for several days. Each morning she looked at it before stepping outside with uncovered eyes, allowing herself to notice little details she had hidden from the world for so many years. She admired golden sunlight shining across the rooftops, bright maple leaves dancing through gentle breezes, smiling children racing through narrow streets, and the quiet beauty of ordinary life she had always seen but never allowed herself to acknowledge openly. Every simple moment felt strangely new. One peaceful afternoon, while delivering fresh bread to the elderly widow she had faithfully visited for years, Olivia noticed a traveler waiting beside the village fountain. Although dressed once again in modest clothing rather than royal garments, Adrian no longer concealed his identity. Villagers bowed respectfully as he passed, yet he greeted each person with the same warm smile he had offered while disguised as an ordinary stranger. When Olivia approached, they shared a brief silence that required no explanation. At last Adrian thanked her for returning to the life she had almost forgotten belonged to her. Olivia smiled softly before admitting that freedom still felt unfamiliar, as though she were learning to walk a new path after traveling the old one for too long. Adrian understood immediately. He told her that courage did not erase fear overnight. Instead, it quietly replaced fear one honest step at a time. They walked together through the village without ceremony or expectation, speaking about simple things that had nothing to do with royal responsibilities or hidden secrets. Olivia shared childhood memories of climbing old oak trees before fear entered her life, while Adrian described distant mountain villages where people measured greatness by kindness instead of family names. The conversation flowed with remarkable ease because neither of them needed to pretend anymore. As the afternoon faded into a sky painted with shades of gold and amber, they arrived beside a quiet hill overlooking Silver Hollow. Olivia paused there for several peaceful moments, taking in a view she had secretly admired countless times, yet had never been free to enjoy openly. Adrian stood beside her without interrupting the silence. He understood that some victories required no applause because they lived entirely within the heart. Olivia finally turned toward him with grateful eyes and thanked him, not for discovering her secret, but for seeing the frightened girl hidden beneath it. Adrian answered with a gentle smile, telling her that he had never rescued her. She had carried the strength to change her own life all along. He had simply recognized it before she did. And beneath the warm evening sky, both of them realized that the strongest bonds were never created by ancient customs or royal authority, but by the quiet trust that grew whenever two people chose to see one another exactly as they truly were. Autumn slowly surrendered to early winter, and with each passing week the changes that had begun inside the great ceremonial hall became part of everyday life throughout Silver Hollow. Young Omegas walked through village streets with lighter hearts because they knew their futures would no longer be decided without their voices being heard. Alpha families gradually discovered that respect created stronger bonds than expectation ever could, and conversations once shaped by obligation slowly gave way to friendships built upon understanding. The kingdom did not become perfect overnight, but it became kinder, and that quiet difference reached places no royal decree alone could have touched. Olivia embraced each new day with growing confidence, finding joy in simple moments she had once experienced only in secret. She visited the village market without lowering her eyes, smiled openly at neighbors who had known her for years, and laughed with children who were delighted to learn that the woman they had believed could never see had always admired the colors of every changing season. The walking cane remained inside her cottage, resting peacefully beside the fireplace as a reminder not of deception, but of the courage it had taken to survive until hope finally arrived. Adrian continued traveling across his kingdom as he always had, believing that a ruler should understand the lives of ordinary people instead of viewing them only from the walls of a castle. Yet each journey eventually brought him back to Silver Hollow, where conversations with Olivia became an unexpected source of wisdom. They spoke about books, quiet forests, childhood memories, and dreams for the future. Neither rushed to define what was slowly growing between them, because both understood that the strongest relationships were never built through pressure or tradition. They were built through patience, honesty, and freely chosen trust. As the first snow of the season covered the hills surrounding the village, Adrian invited Olivia to walk with him beneath towering oak trees whose branches shimmered with delicate white frost. The peaceful landscape stretched before them like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Olivia paused to watch snowflakes drift gently through the morning light, smiling as they landed softly upon her outstretched hand. She admitted that for many years she had believed destiny belonged only to those born with power or privilege, never imagining that her own life could become part of something greater. Adrian quietly answered that destiny often revealed itself through ordinary acts of courage that seemed insignificant at the time. A frightened young girl choosing to protect her freedom had eventually inspired an entire kingdom to rediscover compassion. Looking across the snow-covered valley, Olivia realized that every painful year she had spent hiding had led her to this peaceful moment, not because suffering was meant to define her life, but because she had refused to surrender the hope that one day she would be free to live honestly. As they turned toward the path leading back to the village, their hands gently found one another without hesitation or ceremony, joined not by ancient customs or royal commands, but by mutual respect and quiet affection freely given. Behind them, Silver Hollow stood brighter than it had in generations, its future no longer guided by fear, but by understanding. And as the winter sun broke through the clouds, casting warm light across the untouched snow, Olivia took another confident step forward with nothing left to hide, while beside her walked an alpha king who had changed his kingdom by choosing to see not the role someone performed, but the truth quietly waiting within their heart. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What was your favorite moment, and what message or lesson did you take away from Olivia and Adrian's journey? Share your opinion in the comments below and join the conversation with fellow story lovers. If you enjoyed this tale, please give the video a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Alpha's Regret Stories. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next exciting story filled with romance, drama, betrayal, and unforgettable twists. See you in the next story.